The world's greatest secret keeper was held in a Manhattan jail where even a bird couldn't flap its wings unnoticed. He was ordered to be under 24-hour watch. 2 armed guards and 2 cameras stood outside his cell. But on that night of August 10th, 2019, the cameras suddenly went blind. The guards fell asleep, and Jeffrey Epstein was silenced forever. Was it truly suicide, or did the global elite erase the evidence? Today, we pull back every curtain the governments tried to drop on that final night. Welcome back to Mystery in the Dark. We have reached the conclusion of this series. In previous episodes, we heard stories of wealth and cruelty, but today's episode is dedicated to the questions that the world is still seeking answers to. Jeffrey Epstein's death, an accident or a conspiracy? Let's step inside that Manhattan fortress. The date was July 6, 2019. The sun was setting over Teterboro Airport in New Jersey as a private jet touched down. Jeffrey Epstein stepped onto the tarmac, perhaps thinking he was still the untouchable billionaire who owned the world. But as the FBI agents surrounded him, the invisible shield finally evaporated. The man who spent decades in the shadows was finally in the glare of the light. He was taken to the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in Manhattan, a place often described as more brutal than Guantanamo Bay. This was the beginning of the end. Unit 9 South. That was the name of the high security wing where Epstein was held. It was a fortress within a fortress. The cell was small, damp, and smelled of rust and cleaning chemicals. For a man who owned private islands and mansions in Paris, this was a psychological death sentence. But from the moment he arrived, something was wrong. The procedures that govern a high-profile asset like Epstein began to fail one by one. On July 23rd, Epstein was found on the floor of his cell with marks around his neck. He claimed his cellmate, a former police officer accused of quadruple murder, had tried to kill him. The authorities, however, called it a suicide attempt and put him on suicide watch. Suicide watch in a federal prison is supposed to be absolute. You are placed in a special smock that cannot be torn to make a noose, in a room with no corners or sharp objects, and under 24-hour direct observation. But mysteriously, after just 6 days, Epstein was taken off suicide watch. Why? Who gave the order to move a man who had already shown suicidal tendencies back into a regular cell? He was moved to a cell where he was supposed to have a cellmate, but on the night of August 9th, his cellmate was moved out. Jeffrey Epstein was left completely alone. The golden rule of prison, never leave a high-risk inmate alone, was shattered. Imagine the silence of that night. The MCC is located in the heart of New York, surrounded by millions of people. Yet inside those walls, it was an island of darkness. Epstein knew the secrets of the most powerful people on Earth. He knew that as long as he was alive, he was a ticking bomb for the elite. In the days leading up to his death, Epstein was reportedly in good spirits. He was meeting his lawyers for up to 12 hours a day, talking about his defense, and even paying for other inmates' commissary to buy their protection. This was not a man preparing to die. This was a man preparing to fight. The night of August 9th, 2019, into the morning of August 10th, remains one of the most scrutinized periods in the history of the American justice system. At the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, the air was thick with heat and the sound of failing infrastructure. But in Unit 9 South, where Jeffrey Epstein was being held, the failures weren't just mechanical, they were systemic, almost as if the universe itself was conspiring to leave a gap in the timeline of history. The Manhattan Fortress was about to experience a total collapse of protocol. The first major anomaly was staffing. On that fateful night, the two guards assigned to watch over the most high-profile prisoner in the world were not veteran officers. One was a substitute who had been working for 5 consecutive days, and the other was a former correctional officer who had been drafted back into service because of staffing shortages. Both were exhausted, working massive amounts of overtime. In a high-security wing, guards are required to conduct rounds every 30 minutes. This involves walking to the cell door, looking through the glass, and verifying that the inmate is breathing and safe. But from 10:30 p.m. until nearly 6:30 a.m. the next morning, these rounds simply stopped. For nearly 8 hours, the man who knew too much was left in total, unmonitored isolation. Then came the mystery of the cameras. The MCC is equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance. There are cameras in the hallways, cameras at the checkpoints, and cameras outside the high-value cells. However, when investigators later went to review the footage from the night of Epstein's death, they were met with a shocking discovery. 2 cameras directly outside Epstein's cell had malfunctioned. They were recording, but the footage was unusable, or as some reports claimed, permanently deleted due to a technical error. How do the only 2 cameras watching the world's most dangerous witness fail at the exact same moment the guards fall asleep? It was a blind spot that seemed almost surgically created to allow something to happen in the darkness. Inside the cell, the conditions were even more suspicious. Epstein had been moved to a cell with a broken sprinkler system and a bed with linens that were supposed to be suicide-proof. Yet the official narrative claims he managed to use a bedsheet to end his life. But there's a catch. The bedsheet used was of a material that many inmates claim is impossible to tear or tie in a way that would support the weight of a grown man. Furthermore, Epstein's cellmate had been moved out just hours earlier, leaving him without a witness. In a prison where space is a luxury and inmates are packed like sardines, the world's most famous prisoner was suddenly given the luxury of total privacy. While the guards, Tova Knoll and Michael Thomas, later admitted to napping and browsing the internet instead of doing their jobs, the question remains, why were they allowed to do so? Why was the supervisor not checking on them? Why was the central control room not noticing that the rounds were not being logged? It wasn't just a failure of 2 individuals, it was a total blackout of the entire security architecture. As the sun began to rise over Manhattan on August 10th, the guards finally approached Cell 39. What they found inside would spark a firestorm of conspiracy theories that still burn today. Jeffrey Epstein was dead, but the mystery of how he died in a blind spot of a high-security prison was just beginning. The death of Jeffrey Epstein was quickly labeled a suicide by hanging, but the medical evidence told a far more violent and complicated story. When the chief medical examiner of New York City performed the autopsy, the findings sent shockwaves through the medical community. The physical state of Epstein's body did not match the typical profile of someone who had ended their own life in a sitting or kneeling position, as the official report suggested. The focus of the entire mystery centered on one specific part of the human anatomy, the hyoid bone. During the examination, it was discovered that Epstein had multiple fractures in his neck. Most notably, his hyoid bone, a small U-shaped bone near the Adam's apple, was broken in 3 places. In the world of forensic pathology, a broken hyoid bone is a massive red flag. While it can occasionally happen in suicidal hangings, especially in older individuals, it is a classic hallmark of manual strangulation, meaning someone using their hands or external force to choke a person to death. The fractures were so severe that Dr. Michael Baden, a world-renowned forensic pathologist hired by Epstein's brother, publicly disagreed with the official ruling. He stated that in his 50 years of experience, he had almost never seen such fractures in a suicidal hanging. According to him, the evidence pointed directly toward homicide. The mystery deepened when the logistics of the hanging were analyzed. Epstein was 6 feet tall. The bunk bed in his cell was relatively low. For him to have hanged himself, he would have exerted immense force from a near-sitting position. Medical experts argued that for the hyoid bone to break in 3 places under those circumstances was statistically improbable. It suggested a struggle. It suggested a level of violence that a simple bedsheet tied to a bunk bed could rarely achieve. Furthermore, there were reports of hemorrhaging in Epstein's eyes and other bruising that often correlate with a struggle against an attacker, rather than a passive drop or suspension. But it wasn't just the bones that were broken. It was the chain of custody of the truth. The New York Medical Examiner's Office initially listed the cause of death as pending, only to change it to suicide just days later, despite the conflicting evidence. This sudden certainty from the authorities felt like a forced closure to many. Why was the investigation rushed? Why were the photos of the neck injuries not released to the public for independent review? The more the government insisted it was suicide, the more the forensic details suggested a professional hit. Even the way Epstein's body was removed from the cell raised eyebrows. He was photographed being wheeled out on a gurney with his face clearly visible, a rare sight for such a high-profile case. Some theorists even suggested that the man on the gurney didn't perfectly match Epstein's ear shape or nose structure, leading to the viral "Epstein didn't kill himself" movement. While those theories vary in credibility, the medical fact remains. A 66-year-old man with secrets that could destroy empires was found with a shattered neck in a cell that was supposed to be the safest place in the country. The broken bones were the silent witnesses to a truth that Jeffrey Epstein could no longer speak, and they whispered a word that the government refused to say: murder. With the death of Jeffrey Epstein, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over the courtrooms and corridors of power. But this silence wasn't the sound of peace. It was the sound of a massive, coordinated sigh of relief from the world's elite. As the news of his suicide broke on the morning of August 10, 2019, hundreds of powerful men, princes, presidents, CEOs, and scientists realized that their darkest secrets had just been buried 6 feet under. The man who held the keys to their destruction was gone, and with him, the immediate threat of a public trial that would have unmasked the global syndicate of abuse. For decades, Epstein had been the bridge between high society and high-level crime, and now that bridge had been burnt to the ground. The aftermath was a masterclass in controlled chaos and institutional damage control. While the public screamed for answers and protesters gathered outside the MCC jail, the legal and financial system began a slow, quiet process of cleaning up. Jeffrey Epstein's vast estate, worth over $600 million, was moved into a newly created trust called the 1953 Trust just 2 days before his death. This was a calculated move. By putting his assets in this trust, he made it incredibly difficult for his survivors to sue for damages, as the money was now shielded by complex layers of privacy and legal protection. Even in his final moments, Epstein ensured he was one step ahead of justice. It was one last act of defiance against the girls he had exploited for years. However, the fight for the truth did not die with him. The focus of the world soon shifted to the woman in the room, Ghislaine Maxwell. For nearly a year, she vanished, becoming the world's most wanted woman. She was hiding in a secluded 157-acre mansion in New Hampshire, living in total secrecy until the FBI finally tracked her down and dragged her into the light. Her arrest and subsequent conviction in 2021 provided some measure of justice for the survivors, but the bigger, more haunting question remained: where were the others? If Maxwell was the recruiter and Epstein was the broker, who were the clients? Who were the men paying for these services? Thousands of names were in his flight logs and his black book, yet the names of the most powerful people remain largely protected by the shadows of national security. The final secret of the Epstein saga isn't just about the mechanics of how he died in cell 39. It's about what happened to the mountain of evidence he had spent years collecting. During the raids on his Manhattan and Palm Beach properties, the FBI seized thousands of hours of video footage from hidden cameras and hard drives that were reportedly full of compromat or blackmail material. Yet years later, the public has seen very little of this evidence. Some intelligence experts believe Epstein was more than just a predator. He was a high-level asset, using his Lolita Express and private island to gather leverage on global leaders to influence international policy. If this is true, his death wasn't just a failure of a prison system, it was a strategic offboarding of an operative who had become a liability to the people at the very top. As we look back at this dark journey through 5 episodes, we see a trail of broken lives and a system that repeatedly chose to protect the powerful over the innocent. The Epstein saga is a mirror held up to the face of modern society, showing us that wealth can buy silence, buy lawyers, and even buy time, but it cannot permanently erase the truth. The survivors, through their unimaginable courage, managed to do what no government agency could. They broke the spell of the invisible shield. They proved that a victim's voice, when joined with others, can bring down a billionaire. Jeffrey Epstein is a ghost now, but the lessons of his life and death serve as a haunting reminder that in the shadows of our world, the most dangerous monsters are often those who wear the finest suits and sit in the highest offices. The case may be closed in the eyes of the law, but in the heart of history, the investigation never ends. Before we close this series, I have 3 questions for you to think about. First, even after Epstein's death, the powerful names in his black book remained largely free. Do you believe the full truth will ever come out, or will these files stay classified forever? Second, after looking at the forensic evidence of his broken bones and the failure of the cameras, what does your gut tell you? Did Jeffrey Epstein really take his own life, or was he silenced to protect others? And finally, what was the most shocking part of this entire saga for you? Is this just the crime of one man, or is it a sign of a rot in the entire global system? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching this series on Mystery in the Dark. The truth doesn't stay in the dark forever. It just needs a voice to find it. We will see you in the next mystery. Goodbye.